recording this meeting, and our agenda for today, paste the link to that in the chat one more time. We'll be reviewing where we are with dynamic registration and just doing a quick presentation by Claude and then a demo by D2L, Sheena, and there may be others. I'm not sure if others are planning to also share their dynamic registration implementation work, but happy to demonstrate multiples if there are multiple people who'd like to show. And then Bracken's going to talk about some updates that he's been making to the new reference implementation. And then we should have plenty of time at the end, or maybe throughout the two main areas of our agenda, to open it up for question and answer. And this is really one of the most valuable parts of this meeting, we think, is direct access to the QTI, or LTI, I'm sorry, I just come from a QTI meeting. LTI engineers, the project group chairs, those people who are very familiar with the LTI specs. So if you do have some specific questions or implementation issues, requests for new features, etc., those are all fair options for discussion as we go into the Q&A part of the agenda. So thanks for being here, everyone, and let's get right into dynamic registration.
Okay. So let me share my screen here. All right. So dynamic registration. Do you see my screen? Yeah. Yep. Okay, cool. Yeah. So dynamic registration. So with LTI Advantage, we've gained security. It's a more symmetric relationship where we both exchange our private and public keys. But that's made the deployment of LTI tools quite more complicated and error prone, especially there is a lot of copy paste. So really dynamic registration is a way to automate the configuration of an LTI Advantage tools. And it's based, like we've done with OpenID, we've tried to reuse existing specification in the OpenID space. It's called OpenID OpenID Connect Discovery and OpenID Connect Dynamic Client Registration. So we've tried to use those and adapt them as much as possible to be used in the context of LTI, again, to automate the deployment of LTI tools. So I'm just going to explain quickly what happens when we do a dynamic registration, and then we'll go into a couple of demonstrations, and maybe Chuck even have the time to do the Sakai one. We'll see. So the first thing here, how that works, is that a tool is going to give a registration initiation URL to the LMS administrator. So the LMS administrator will then put this URL into the LMS and trigger the dynamic registration. By triggering the dynamic registration, the LMS is going to open an iframe to this registration initiation URL, to which it's going to add additional parameters, which is the OpenID configuration of the LMS, and optionally a registration token that is to be used to actually complete the registration. So with this information, then, so the platform opens the LMS in an iframe with the registration URL and this data. Then from that data, could go in present mode, I guess. Then from that data, the tool can then use the OpenID configuration URL to do a service call to the platform to get the OpenID configuration from the platform. So that's giving the platform side view of the OpenID configuration. And this OpenID configuration contains the registration endpoint that's going to be used by the tool to actually push its registration request. So it describes the platform from an OpenID and LTI standpoint and includes the registration endpoint. So we see here what it would look like. So this is the OpenID configuration from a platform. It gives the issuer, it gives all this kind of information that are needed to do the OpenID configuration. But it also has been enriched by LTI bits. And so the LTI bits are, for example, the scopes, which represent the services supported by the platform. So here the platform is telling you, I do support those services. You can request access to those by requesting those scopes. And it also gives the additional purely LTI bits, especially around the kind of messages that are supported. like the LTI lunch supported, and also the substitution variables that are supported. So this is informational, so that the tool knows what are the capabilities of the platform when it comes to LTI. So again, in addition to the OpenID wiring. So once the tool got that, then the tool can decide to present some kind of UI to the end user to go through the registration process. Say, do you want to register with this LMS and whatever that is. At the end of this flow, then the tool is going to issue request to register to the platform using the registration URL. And so it's going to post this tentative client definition. This is what I am from an OpenID standpoint, and also what I would like to use from an LTI context also. So here is a tool configuration that's going to be sent by the tool to the platform into the registration request. Again, that's a service call. And this is again going to contain all the OpenID discovery bits and pieces, all the plumbing for OpenID, but it's also going to say, well, I'd like, I'm telling you that I'm also supporting deep linking requests. So I'd like you to create, to flag the support for deep linking. And this is the URL I'd like to use for deep linking. And also I'd like to get those custom parameters when we do an LTI launch. And this is the domain I want to use. So basically all the LTI bits that comes in addition to the OpenID discovery. And the platform receives this request. And this request may include the registration token. That's how the platform would decide that it's okay or not to accept this registration request. If it's accepted and processed, then the platform will issue the client ID here and return the client registration as created within the platform. So it may differ. So for example, if a platform doesn't support some context parameters, then they might not be into the final client registration. But the platform returns to the client the effective client registration with the client ID. Then that completes the registration from the platform standpoint. And so all is good here, and the tool may decide, yes, registration is successful, and should, so therefore a success or a failure. And when this is done here, from the LMS viewpoint, the iframe is still in the tool side. So the tool needs to indicate to the UI, to the LMS platform on the browser that it's okay to close the window because the registration is complete. So for that, we use a Windows post message where we say to the parent window, I'm done, you can close me. And so then the LMS will close the iframe. And usually also there is a final step, is that we recommend platforms when they register a tool to not activate it right away, but have the admin look at everything that was basically exchanged and do a sanity check before to activate the tool. And for example, a tool may have requested some last name, first name, email. And the admin might decide, well, you know, at this stage, I'm not comfortable giving this information, so they can definitely override that. Because at the end of all this process, you have a pure LTI Advantage tool as if you had done it manually. It's not any different as if you've done it manually. It's just all the information has been exchanged automatically. But then you can go there as an LMS admin and revisit it at will as if you had done it completely manually. So that's the full flow for the dynamic registration. And again, it's an automated registration. It's not a contract negotiation, right? So you go stuff in there and things may change. The LMS administrator may decide to revoke or add additional rights to a given tool. And so that's in member final draft, I think. I'm already a bit fuzzy exactly on the terminology here. But the good news is that it's actually already available in 3 major LMSs out there. So it's in Moodle since 3.10, it's in Sakai, and it's in D12 Brightbase. And we'll do at least a couple of demo right away on Moodle and D12. So, but is there any questions before we go into the demo on that? Nope. Zoom. Okay. So let's do the actual demo. So I'll start quickly with Moodle, and then Sheena, you can take on for D12. So in the context of Moodle, I'm going to use a test tool, which is going to show you the different steps in the dynamic registration. So the test tool has a registration URL that I enter here. And I say I want to add an LTI Advantage tool. And this thing here is that Moodle will detect that this tool is already, this domain is already configured, and it's going to ask you if you want to update in place or register as a new tool. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to update. So this allows me within Moodle site to move from 1.0 to 1.3 through a dynamic registration. So I say, okay, I'm going to update. And here, because it's a test tool, there is no user is not prompted to do anything or validate or anything like that. It just go through all the steps. And you see here, it's been successful. So what we see is that we got the OpenID configuration URL. We got from this Moodle site, we got the its OpenID configuration, which everything is supported, the services, the different claims, and all the substitution variables supported. And it contains the registration URL. So from that, I'm going to skip this part because this is related to upgrade. Then now I'm going to propose to Moodle a tentative tool configuration. So this is the kind of messages I'd like to get. In particular, I'd like to support LTI deep linking request and a context launch. And I'm going to post that to Moodle. And Moodle is going to return me a success here with my client ID. That's going to remember that. And it's going to tell me what's my actual registration. And you see here in this version of Moodle, it only supports a deep linking request. So my request to get a context launch was ignored because this is not something that this Moodle site supports for now. So you just get the deep linking. And this is going to send the post message to Moodle to close the window. But here it's already activated because it was an update. But if it was a new tool, this would be inactive and I would have to activate it to make it available. But if you go in here, it's all configured. Everything has been exchanged through dynamic registration, custom parameters, messages, and services, and all of that. So that sits on the Moodle side. Any question? Okay.
One question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The custom parameters there, I might have missed it. Where do those get configured for the different auto config? Is that different by platform when you're doing the auto config, or is that something that they configure on the platform side for the auto config?
So the custom parameters are in my client configuration when I'm requesting to register my tool. I describe the custom parameters I'd like to get. And usually they're just going to be ingested by the platform, but they might not be supported by the platform. So, but the platform in its OpenID configuration should expose you the ones they support. So it would tell you the one that you could expect would be resolved at runtime by the platform.
So it'll be prompted when you set up the auto config, or?
Well,
just in theory,
Yeah. So let's say that. Let me share my screen quickly here again. So you see here, my tool has requested the resource link ID history, but Moodle doesn't support it. So Moodle did not expose that it supports it. But anyway, I asked for it anyway as my tool. So this is going to be put into the custom parameters, because custom parameters can be either static, or dynamic. And it's just so the platform is just going to put them in there. But the thing is that at runtime, this platform will not be able to resolve that value. So when I will receive the request from the platform, I will see that value unchanged. But there is no prompting or anything like that. It's more like what you could do is try to.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to know that it will get resolved or not. So the platform will tell you. It's like if I go back in here. So manage tools, I do it one more time here. So you see here, that's when I get the configuration from the platform, and the platform is telling me this is the substitution variables I support. And you see resource link ID history is not in there. So I asked for it, but I knew it would not be resolved. At least this is not telling me it could support it. So basically, but it's not because it's not supported that you can put it in there, just have no expectation that it's
you're not going to get any data back and forth on it.
But the thing is that it's good to put it in ahead, because maybe, well, I know it's not in this version of Moodle, but I know it's being worked on. So rather than reconfigure my tool tomorrow, since I know it's a standard items, I might as well ask it for register asking for it.
Sure.
And then when Moodle upgrades, then I suddenly get it. But I need to just be defensive and be able to act if I don't get it.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. Sheena. So Sheena is going to show is going to demo Cengage for me. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Claude, for going through that presentation. Okay, so about 15 minutes before, Claude sent me his registration URL. So they have a really nice email that comes out, and it's part of that email. So what I've done is, I hope everyone can see my screen, but I've gone into D2L as an administrator who has access to LTI Advantage, and I'm going to hit register tool. When I do this, I'm going to be prompted with two options, either a standard registration option, which is the copy paste that Claude had talked about earlier within his presentation, or a dynamic registration. Here I'm going to pop in the URL that was provided, and I have a choice of doing only the registration or also the deployment. The deployment has the additional options of what settings, so what we're going to send back to the tool, as well as the option to create a link. So we're going to do the whole shebang and hit register. And this is launching a new window out, and we're going to confirm the registration.
So that's Cengage screen, by the way.
Yeah.
So all of the things are Cengage screens that got the request, and we ask a confirmation, and then you say, you want to do it? Yes, and then we say close, we are done. This is sending the Windows post message back to D2L.
And that was the full dynamic registration demo. I'm going to click through a couple things just so that I can talk for a little bit longer. But as we can see, we've registered the tool. It is disabled as per the specification. If I go into Cengage, I can see the information that was shared. So this was all the information that came through the API calls that were being made. Cengage also chose the extensions that they wanted, as well as the custom parameters that they wanted. We provided back our registration details back to Cengage, so that's all within the tool now. When I go to the deployment is also set up as well with the same extensions, and then also the information that Cengage asked for. And this is where you, as the administrator, would have the choice of turning on or off whatever details, as well as setting up which org unit. So within Brightspace, we want you to set up your sharing rules, so who can have access to this tool from an org unit perspective. So we would do that. We also share the deployment ID. And then lastly, Cengage has also created a deep linking quick link. And then within that quick link, there is also the launch URL. So all that was done with 3 clicks, I'm pretty sure, versus the many, many clicks that we had in the past.
Magic.
It's really neat. It's fun to watch this too.
Cool.
All
right, thanks, Sheena. I think Chuck, if you're willing to show Sakai, we have some time to do that as well.
Yeah, I'll try to be as short as Sheena, but I think she's like about 1 minute and 45 seconds. So it might take me that long just to get the screen sharing to work. Let's see if that. So are you seeing Firefox?
Yep.
Okay, so so I will add one tiny point to the Claude's presentation that I think is important. And that is one of the problems that LTI Advantage has always had is a chicken and egg problem. And so the LMS wants a bunch of URLs from the tool, and the tool wants a bunch of URLs from the LMS. And so there's this argument like, well, I can't set my site up until you set your site up. And then the other side says, I can't set my site up until you set your site up. And so you kind of have this standoff where and so what we tell people is like, okay, take all those things that you're going to get from the tool and put garbage in those fields, and then do it halfway, and then give them the data they need. And then they will give you back the real data. Then you have to edit the draft that you created on your side to update it. So there's this problem of chicken and egg. And what's great about dynamic registration is, even though it's all talked about protocols, what it really has done is it has made a decision about which came first, the chicken or the egg. And the answer in dynamic registration is both, which means the tool has to get to the point where it can produce its half of the information, and the LMS has to get, like, they both have to get to a draft state, meaning that the tool has to be ready to hand over enough information at one of these URLs so the LMS can get its information, and then the LMS has to be ready to receive it, which means they're sort of in a half-built state, right? And so this really has solved, I think, a real problem of who's on first in LTI Advantage. And so this will not be particularly exciting, and it'll be really quick. If you do install, this is the tool place where you install LTI tools. We're gonna do an LTI Advantage auto provision. Give it a title, and here's the place where, in effect, we are creating a draft registration that knows enough about this endpoint to hand the tool, hand those URLs over to the tool. So we're sort of halfway through saving an external tool. And this, the Sugi here, is halfway through the creation of its endpoint. And so, and it has enough now that it can feed this information back to the LMS. And so we say, type in that URL, and that's, you saw that happen on all of them. That's the tool provided URL. And now because the LMS is half created, the LMS can give the tool back its information because the LMS is halfway created. And then the tool can get all that information, and the tool can finish the creation on its side and then send back the stuff to the LMS so the LMS can finish the creation. And this is actually all happened in the background. And now we're just going to close the screen. So all the stuff went back and forth, and this button is going to say, hey, close my window, because we've actually done everything. And so that's all this really does. And now my LMS side is pulling some of this data from JavaScript, and now much less pretty than what Sheena showed in D2L, but all this information has been populated by that tool. And all we have to do then is press save, and we're done. And so again, as Claude started out to say, this is basically a new way of cutting and pasting, but I would say it's also a new way of thinking about who's on first. So if you're a tool vendor, you're going to have to be able to get your tools to your security arrangements to kind of a half created point so that you can then participate in this. And that's, I think I took 30 seconds more than Sheena, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, and in a way, that's what we do also on the Cengage side. When you want to create a registration, we pre-register the account on our side. We say we give the details, and that generates a registration URL. Then we can pass to the LMS admin. And this is a one-time usage only for this registration. Basically, it's baked in. That's why it's also an expiring link in our case, but you can do it differently. This is a one-off registration for a given customer that we're sending out to that customer to be used one time.
Right.
And I know. I think ChemVantage also, Chuck, you did some stuff on the dynamic registration too there, if I remember correctly. So.
Yes, I did. And I just wanted to say, Claude, thank you. I know you did a lot of work in Moodle to get past some of the third-party cookie issues, because in these LMSs, this is supposed to be done in an iframe. And so some session information can sometimes get lost.
Yeah.
If you like, I'd be happy to show this dynamic registration for ChemVantage. We just have a little bit different stuff on the tool side.
That's something you're ready to do now?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, if you have time, Mark, I don't know if it would be nice to see another tool.
I think so. Bracken, how much time are you?
That's definitely, let's see it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, I think you can see my screen now. This is Moodle, but if I go to site administration in Moodle to plugins, and manage tools. This is, as Claude showed, where you do the dynamic registration. And ChemVantage is a free tool, so our registration URL is open to anybody. So it's just LTI registration.
Yeah, yeah, you need to put the HTTP. Moodle is not that smart, it looks like.
Right. Okay. Okay, so now we go over to ChemVantage, and because anybody can do this, ChemVantage needs some information from the user. So you put in your name and your home URL and accept the terms. And there's a reCAPTCHA here just to keep the robots out, and submit the registration. And so it says registration was successful, and here's the button or the link to close the window. And it created this registration. Then in Moodle, you have to activate this and you're ready to go. So you can go now to a course and add an activity, an external tool, and then select ChemVantage, which we just created. And now it's going through a deep linking process where you can create a quiz on kinetics. You can do multiple quizzes if you like. And save and display. And there you are. So that's an instructor view of the quiz in kinetics. So it's really, really pretty easy. It eliminates a lot of error, and I'm glad for the people on the at the LMSs who have done all this work to make it easy for tools.
Great demo.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chuck, and great to be able to just do that on the fly. All right, any questions around dynamic registration before we move on? Okay. Well, so I guess, Claude, as you mentioned, this specification is in, I think, a member candidate final. So we haven't released the spec as a publicly available specification yet. We do that for the purposes of things like this, so that multiple platforms and tools have a chance to implement it and verify that it's working as we would expect before we open it up for wider adoption and implementation. So this really, I think, puts dynamic registration at that point where we do need to release this as a public draft and begin conformance certification process development for dynamic registration. So I think this will be one of our next items of business in the project group to get that process going. So congratulations, everyone, for the work to define the spec and those early adopters who've just now demonstrated. I mean, I think we saw a demonstration last roundtable meeting a couple of months ago, but to see this come together and then see Chuck, right, just showing a demo without any planning advance part of our agenda today, that's again great news and testament that it's working. So so thanks, everyone. And Bracken, it's over to you for the reference implementation update.
Okay. So I'm going to show you a preview of new reference implementation, LTI. Been working on this for a little while. Didn't quite get it all the way to hosted for this presentation, so that'll still be happening. But let me get my screen shared. So I'm reusing the implementation of the existing LTI reference implementation that IMS has. and kind of putting a new front end on it and making it work a bit differently. My targets really are, we handle lots of LTI support from a very broad set of people who are implementing LTI, from the people in the work group who know all the bits and pieces and are trying to solve new things, to all the people who, have never heard of LTI, but they have to do it because, Andy at Penn State is forcing them to, something like that. So I'm trying to, really address a broad set of needs with these tools to help people understand LTI and implement LTI. And so just kind of keep that general context in mind here. And so what we have now is we've got a test platform and a test tool. So if you are a platform and you're implementing LTI, you will have a tool that you can consistently go to set up in your platform that gives you the debug information. We have many versions of these, a lot of work group members and some of the larger LMS companies have built, similar types of testing tools. I'm trying to have provide similar functionality for a broader set of people and make it more easily hosted and ready to access. So I'm going to walk through what the platform looks like, and I will be showing the test tool inside the test platform here. So once you log in, you'll have access to both of these. You'll get a dynamic registration URL for your test tool if you want to go set it up if you're in the platform. Platform is kind of broken up into three main areas: registrations, tests or demo contexts, which I'll get into, and then the actual LTI launches will appear in this bottom area down here. So the LTI reference tool will always be pre-installed. So if someone wants to get in here and start learning about LTI, they don't have to get it set up or anything. It's just here ready to go and interact with. And then you have your ability to register your own tools here, just in this exact process that we just saw demoed in all those LMSs. And you also will have a manual registration. I'm not actually done with this implementation yet. I don't get to steal the previous implementation because it didn't exist. So I'm still working on that. But as Claude was showing, for both the platform and the tool, I have the configuration data showing up here, and it's going to be, I'm hoping to make it really easy to install this tool and install tools in the platform with dynamic registration. So that'll be cool. So whether you're going to use the reference tool or install your own tool, you just kind of deal with the registrations on this platform. And then when you actually want to test the tools or use LTI launches, I'm trying to make it really easy to test various LTI scenarios. The most common one, of course, is you have a course in an LMS or some other platform like that. But there's a lot of other contexts where LTI launches make sense and are being used. So like an admin area, a user area, maybe an e-portfolio is a common example of, if the context is going to be a user and not a course. And so over time, I hope to get feedback and figure out what types of contexts and users and sections will be most useful to help people test the various LTI bits that exist, and just make it really easy to continually test those and have your own little test course to do that easily without having to, configure something in an LMS, and make these really reusable and easy. So for this one, it gives a little preview of what a little bit of the data about the course is going to be. You choose which user you're going to be launching with. And then down here, you have the LTI links. And so how this is going to work, because again, this is focused on testing. It's not, going to be a lessons structure for a course like in an LMS. For each of the registered LTI tools, there will be a little block here that shows the relevant LTI links for that registration. And what I tried to do is, as Claude showed on the registration, you can kind of have some predefined launches. And so I want, if the registration defines some launches, they're just going to be here ready to use. If you add them via deep linking, or I need to make so you can do it manually, it will also show up here as added links. And so again, this isn't really going to do a course structure. It's just going to try to keep it easy so that if you've got multiple tools you're testing or multiple versions of your own tools, you can kind of keep those links separate and understand the context where those links go. So so this is, again, this is kind of the platform side of it. And then the tool, which I'll show you once I start clicking these links, kind of has 3 main endpoints. So I guess 4 with deep linking and then the registration. And I'll walk through each of these, and then we'll spend the most time on the debug launch. And so it's a test tool. And so, the most simple version of a launch is just showing content. So if you're just using the show content endpoint, it's going to launch to the end, and it's the content at the end. So what happened here was this bottom area expanded, and there's an iframe down here. And unlike on the existing, the current LTI reference implementation, I have the platform and the tool set up on separate domains. That will allow us to, as we're working on cookies and iframe problems, for example, have a test bed where it's a lot easier to test those things. So that's, so you just see the content. I'll get to these areas in a second. So that's and then there's also an educational launch. Maybe I'll just fold that into the show content, I'm not sure, but what the education launch does, which is a little different, is it stops at each stage along the way. So now we're on the testing tool down here, and we're on the first leg of an LTI launch, which is the initiation request. So it gives a little information about that. And I hope to, as we do lots of training workshops and boot camps and stuff. And every time as I'm kind of preparing for those, my plan is to update this content based on the feedback and questions I get from people and what I think is going to be most helpful for those kinds of contexts. So I do hope to continually update and keep this content fresh and improve it by linking out to documentation and stuff like that. And so, even if you're installing this tool inside your platform instead of this test platform, you'll still have access to kind of learning about LTI and the context that you're doing that. So that's the education launch. And then finally, we'll go through the debug launch. And so this debug launch, the tool, so if you're installing the tool inside your platform and doing this debug launch, you're going to get a lot of great functionality. This platform that is embedding this tool has also some interesting debug functionality. And so together they make a great learning tool around LTI, but also if you're testing your own tool in this platform, you're going to be able to debug it even if your tool doesn't have these debug features. And the same for your platform. You can use this tool to help debug your platform, even if your platform doesn't have similar debug features. So you're kind of seeing both sides of it here, but the hope is that regardless of how you're implementing LTI, these tools will help you be able to figure out your implementation. So let me start walking through each of these areas in more detail now. So again, since this is meant to be a testing tool, I don't want you to have to be hopping to a bunch of different areas and going through many different pages. So I kind of have it set up so it's, you can kind of focus down here on the LTI launch. And since this is the debug launch, you'll see it's the same testing tool, and we're stopped at the initiation request again, but now we've got this big yellow debug information bar here. And what this has is a bunch of debug information, of course. And again, if you were using this tool on your platform, you would get the same data. And so for each stage of the LTI launch, I tried to break it down into the data you received from the other party and what you're going to be sending to the next stage of it. And so since this is the initiation request, the first leg, and we're sitting at the tool, this is what the tool received from the platform. So an OIDC initiation request has an issuer, target link URI, these login hints, and I had a client ID in there, but I was making changes and it disappeared apparently. You can kind of really easily see, oh, here's the data we got from the platform. And then this is what we're going to send back. So the first leg is the initiation request, and then the tool does an authorization request. So what this says here, back to the URL, and the URL was exchanged during registration. That's part of, so here's the platform's registration information. And the URL is somewhere in here. Though this is in progress, so maybe I don't have it in there yet. But the authorization request URL is part of the registration information. And then the tool has to add all this extra information in there. And so it's really easy to preview this in here. And so that's what this kind of debug information is. And then I'm trying to create a reusable JavaScript library that will kind of do some of these tests for you on your own tools if you want to install it. And it's going to print out, I'll be able to print out a little report about the capabilities of this current page. And so even though we have all this debug information, it's trying to, check if you can set cookies and stuff like that. And so that's still very much early days, and we'll see where that goes. But I've been working on that. And then also inside this debug area, there's various tasks that you might want to be able to test and try. Explicitly request storage access. We talked about that in the cookie presentation recently. If you need to open a new tab, reload this page, just continue with the auth request. I don't know what other actions will be useful here. I've got a few ideas. And so based on feedback, we'll see what things are useful there. So again, we're at the first stage still of the launch. And so now I kind of want to show these other bits in here. So this is, again, that lower frame of an LTI launch. Here's the iframe. Then I have these three little windows here. And the goal of these is to just kind of help give us context on where we're at. So we're doing an LTI launch here. I want to do similar flows for registration and deep linking and make it kind of report on the progress. But you can see log initiation request complete, because that's the stage we're at now. And this tool has reported via a post message that it's capable of setting cookies, that it is in an iframe, and it supports window post messages. Over time, we'll figure out what things are best to report there. But this is a custom debug message that this tool is sending. And so, if you are testing your tool in here, it probably won't report these issues. So, we'll try to make it so it won't be confusing if you don't have that. And then let me go to the next stage. So we have an iframe. We're going to go to the next stage now. So we're on the initiation request, and we're going to do an authorization request back to the platform. So now we're stopped at the platform again. Normally you wouldn't see this screen. It would just kind of, automatically go to the next stage. But now you're stopped here. And again, this is useful if you're testing a tool, because you can see the data that you sent from the tool to the platform. Now, we just saw this on the last page, but that's because, again, we have two debug apps right now. So we're kind of seeing all the extra information. But this allows tools that are wanting to figure out how well they're working to be able to see the information that they sent to the platform. And then the platform, again, is reporting what it's going to send to the tool for the last leg of the LTI launch. And so it's just kind of nice to help stop along the way. And before I do the last leg, I want to show this last little window. And this is meant to be like a timeline of all the events going back and forth. And I will definitely be improving this over time to make the various areas clearer. But I'm going to expand this and look at it. And so for each stage, we get a little banner here that says the initiation request. And the very first thing in here is the platform sent a get to the tool. Here's the URL it went to, and you can expand it to see the details of what was sent. And so this is kind of a log of all those little debug areas that we saw along the way. And so, if you get to the third stage and you're like, oh man, I didn't notice that thing from the first stage, I have to go do a launch again to look at it. The hope is that you kind of have a history here, and it makes it really easy for your debugging process. And we'll see what tools will be helpful around this. But I'm thinking of maybe adding like a save this history button, and it will make it easy to like share with me if I'm helping someone debug, or the LTI work group, or whoever, maybe make URLs to hop to these and help people debug each other's things in a really easy way as well. So I don't know exactly what functionality we'll all want and need for this, but it might be nice to save these and use them for other purposes like that. So we're during the initiation requests, all of these events happened, and I'll go through them. And then we went to the second page, and these are the events that happened during the authorization request. And then you see that's where we're at right now. So if we do this last leg and do the authorization response, you will see now that we have authorization response messages. And so now let me go ahead and show you the details of each of these. I have a button so you can expand and see details on all these. And here's all the chatter happening between these. So this is the official initiation request. And then these capabilities I mentioned are getting reported from that tool. So you can see this is just that Windows post message that reported those capabilities from that tool. So it's just a custom thing I made for this. I'll probably, as we're working on browser post message formatting with the LTI work group, I'll make this a bit more of official of a format. But this data is just for this debugging purposes. But you can kind of see this is the tool sending a message saying, hey, here's the stuff that's working for me or not. And then I also have, you'll notice the iframe was expanding. So if you look down here, the iframe is that big, but when you expand the debug information, the iframe expands and gets a little bit bigger. So those are also post messages that are resizing the iframe from the inner frame. And so it's even logging these window resize messages. And you can imagine that being really useful, especially as we use more and more post message stuff, being able to see that chatter back and forth and know, when it was sent. We know this was sent during the initiation request. It said set the height to 614 and then set the height to 211. This is when, scroll back to the top at the end. These can be kind of noisy. So I also made it so you can hide all those resize things and ignore all the resize chatter. And any other types of events, we'll be able to make filters to filter those out. And then just to show, again, that same data that we saw in the debug thing. So authorization request stage, this was the platform reporting the auth request data it got from the tool. So again, that same stuff we saw on that second stage is available right here. And then the final one, the auth response, it's that same data. So you can see the state and the ID token. And I'm planning to make a nice little preview for all these JWTs that are flying around that, shows the data in there so you don't have to copy and paste that to look at it closer. I'm trying to make that really convenient and simple as well. So again, the hope with all of this is that as people are developing tools and platforms, that they'll have a tool that's consistently can be installed and a platform that you can install your tools in that help you understand the proper flow of LTI, but also actually debug the data that's flying around inside of there and just kind of help the community in general and make it a little easier to test their tools and get a better understanding of everything. And there's a lot of similar tools like this built in the community, and I'm hoping to kind of hook them all together in here and have a nice little community showcase of registered tools that we can test as well. So this is just a preview. Over the next few weeks, my plan is to get this hosted and then start testing it with members in the work group, because there will definitely be some bugs and problems with the implementation, even though I'm reusing it. And then after we kind of get some of those kinks worked out, make this, release it for everyone to use and learn from. So any questions or comments about this first, and then we can ask, see if there's any general ones as well. I didn't have my chat open. I'll open it now and see if there were chats. Yeah. Do you want to see it right now, Chuck? So the vague plan of this is to be similar to the current reference implementation where members can just log in via the website and utilize this and not have to worry about hosting or doing anything themselves. And your registrations will be remembered, so you can continue to use it to test your tool and updates to your tool. And then I believe we're still going to work at all the details, but the last one was made available to contributing members, under the proper license. And so the plan is to do the same thing for this. I'm also working again on a JavaScript library to solve some of the LTI problems and maybe some of the debugging things. And then I'm trying to also create a Ruby library, because this is the back end of this is implemented in Ruby, the original one too, and hopefully make that available as well. So the details aren't known yet, but some mix of it, yes, will definitely be available. Any other questions? Cool. So if there's no questions about this, do we have any other LTI questions from the community that don't have to necessarily be about dynamic registration or the reference implementation? We're happy to answer those right now too. We didn't get any submissions between now the last meeting and this, so we don't have any prepared.
Yeah, now's your time. If you have any pressing LTI questions, issues, requests, areas of confusion.
Great, nice and easy.
We must be getting good at this. If nobody has any questions.
It's the people who've already had their questions answered who are here still, maybe.
Just saying, Bracken, like the new reference implementation looks extremely helpful. Yeah. Oh, how I wish we had it from day one. But
we couldn't have had this from day one because we didn't know all the problems we need solved. Right?
That is true.
My goal for this has been really the cookie problems, to make those easier to understand and implement, because those are going to be a pain for all of us. So that's my real hope, is that those are made easier by this.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And if you're taking feature requests, I know you were talking about being able to expand out the JWTs, but at the point of doing the LTI launch itself, it would be nice to be able to edit that JWT, to manually edit some of the parameters in it.
Yeah,
just to test like real edge cases of people putting incorrect value types or something like that in one of the claims.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. I have a lot of, once it catches up to the current representation features, including all the services, I plan to get the services into that log as well, by the way. I want to start adding pieces like that, let you choose which of the JWKS KID values you want to use, so you can kind of test rotation stuff, maybe set up, test key rotations, tests, complex courses, and maybe course copies. So like whatever those common scenarios that cause people problems, I want to add features in eventually and over time to help people test those cases. And so whatever those are, I hope the community will keep asking for those, and we'll figure out ways to make it easy to test those without making the tool too difficult to use. So that's going to always be my balance. But yes, that sounds like a good idea, Martin.
Yeah, thanks for all the work you put into that. Looks good.
I'm excited for people to start using it. All right, Mark, I think that's it.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we will be meeting again for our next roundtable the 26th of October. And maybe just to set your excitement a little bit, we should have some more demos and details about the cookie alternative approaches that we've been working through. We have an extended work session tomorrow for the project group members, or I guess Thursday. Today we're Tuesday.
Yeah,
so
I would guess that October roundtable is probably going to be about the cookie work,
right.
So
yeah, so we're hoping to make some good progress in the coming weeks on that, including better documentation, formal documentation that you can begin to preview and work through. So expect some more details around cookie approaches for solving current issues, and then some of the future looking stuff for alternative approaches to cookies, so third-party cookies. So thanks everyone, appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you in a future meeting.